I do think that being a parent actually has a profound effect on somebody's perspective, and we should honor and respect that. But there are a whole host of people who don't have children for a whole host of reasons, and they certainly are great people who can participate fully in the life of this country. And that's not what I said, Trey. If you look at what the left has done, they have radically taken this out of context and, in fact, aggressively lied about what I've said. What I do think is true, Trey, and this goes to the heart of what I was talking about 3 years ago in those comments, but it's going to be something I continue to talk about, is that the left has increasingly become explicitly anti-child and anti-family. They've encouraged young families not to have children at all because of concerns over climate change. They've suggested that people who do have children are somehow being selfish, when I think being a parent is actually the most selfless thing that you can do, and again, really does transform your perspective. So this is not a criticism and was never a criticism, Trey, of everybody without children. That is a lie of the left. It is a criticism of the increasingly anti-parent and anti-child attitude of the left.
Trey Gowdy's lead guest, the vice presidential nominee, JD Vance, last night, responding to backlash from the left over his 2021 comments made to Tucker Carlson about cat ladies. Our next guest, a former Democrat, agrees, saying her old party never cared about women. Fox News contributor Tammy Bruce is here to explain, author of Fear Itself. Tammy, your reaction to JD Vance explaining.
Also, look, I spent a third of my adult life working on the feminist movement, working to improve women's lives. And frankly, so many things are now in trouble that this is not the thing we have to care about. Nobody cares about that, but it's he's correct. This is a distraction. It may have been slightly inept, but my goodness, the people who are clutching their pearls right now have created an economy that is destroying women's lives. They don't want anybody to talk about that. Creating a condition around the world where women and men and their children are going off to die. It is an extraordinary dynamic. In addition to the crime, to whether you have children or not, what you're going to be able to do if you're going to get to work, because whether or not you have enough gas in the car. Well, crime, can you walk to work and be safe?
But on this in particular,
those are the real issues.
But on this in particular, he was responding to the fact that AOC has said, with climate change, I don't think it's responsible to have kids in our society.
Yes.
And that's why he said, that's what morphed into that. But as Trey Gowdy pointed out, George Washington didn't have kids. Nuns don't have kids. And they are great Americans.
And I think that he knows that. But this is, when you look at the nature of the fear that's moving into people regarding climate change, especially choosing to not have children. And I will say that 70% of abortions happen because women can't afford them. So there's no pro-choice involved here. They would have a child if they knew they could do it. But you stand there and you think, I can't do this. I don't have the money. You're working 2 jobs. That's the Democrat economy.
Speaking about Democrats, it's up to, it looks like, Kamala Harris, the vice president, to pick a running mate for her. So let's look at some of the finalists. For some of the finalists, step over here, Tammy, to see who made the final list. She says she's going to decide by August 7th. First off, the governor of Pennsylvania. He was campaigning hard over the weekend. We'll be doing it again today without her by his side. But he is a so-called moderate in a purple state. Yes,
and one of the issues is, we've already heard this, it's awful, but there's an issue regarding Israel and the Jewish people with the Democrats.
Because he's pro-Israel.
He is pro-Israel. So she's got to balance that 89% of American Jews support Israel, but the base doesn't. The Democrat base that she's pandering to doesn't. So that would be hard for her to
40% of people have no opinion on him. He's going at it hard. We'll see what happens. They find a way to get Pennsylvania right now. They seem to be trailing there.
Important swing state.
When you have Senator Mark Kelly, he brings a lot of credentials and a fine resume to the table over in Arizona.
He does, and he's well liked in Arizona. At the same time, his wife and her organization are giving millions of dollars. Gabby Giffords giving millions of dollars regarding the gun issue to Kamala Harris. That could be an issue, but mostly he invested in a spy balloon company with investments also from a company with ties to the Chinese Communist Party. It was supposed to be for tourism, space tourism, but it moved immediately, well, very quickly, into defense and surveillance.
So, of course, battleground state, and they think that he'll be stronger on the border than Kamala Harris, who possibly is the weakest on the border, and that might be the top issue. Let's look at Tim Walz, the governor of Minnesota, as we move on. And actually, let's go to Pete Buttigieg. We'll go to Tim Walz. Here we go.
Yeah, sure.
He is the very liberal governor from Minnesota, which is suddenly in play.
Yeah, it is, and I would also suggest they've made a big issue regarding age. But they didn't with Biden, but now suddenly they're complaining about Trump's age. I would argue that with Waltz and even Cooper, Waltz is only 60. It looks like he's maybe a bit older than that, but you have to think about the 39-year-old JD Vance at the other podium. That could be an issue. But she also, I think, look, whether it's the border or any other issue, she is not going to want, frankly, someone to be making the decisions. And I think that, it's not like Kelly is going to be making decisions about the border as the vice president.
So what's some of the things they bring to the table when you think about the George Floyd and the unrest that really started in Minneapolis, and you saw how terribly that was handled? You also see the fact that he does have a military background. He was serving in the National Guard for a couple of decades.
But he's more aligned with her when it comes to the issues.
And using social spending. All right, now let's move on. Another contender that's certainly going to be on the short list, that appeared on the short list for the first time, is Pete Buttigieg. He was on with Shannon yesterday.
The weakest decision. He was a failed mayor. There's plenty of things to go after him about. Being on paternity leave during the supply chain crisis, the bridge collapse, the arguments that we don't know where he is, and if even the train crash in East Palestine.
Transportation has never been worse.
It's horrible. This is maybe he'll end up, of course, in a cabinet, as he already has, but he's not going to be her vice presidential choice.
And we also know that President Biden rarely met with his cabinet. They haven't met in 9 months.
Yes, exactly. They have no idea.
So he really has not done a great job as transportation.
No,
very
average
mayor, but he's definitely comfortable in front of the camera. Next, let's take a look at these two very successful so-called moderate governors in red states.
Problem.
Let's start here with Roy Cooper.
North Carolina, important swing state. He's 67 years old. That seems like it could be an interesting choice. Andy Bashir.
Because Democrats think they can still take North Carolina.
They do, and that would be key for her. Actually, Georgia and North Carolina. Andy Bashir, Kentucky, not a swing state, but he won his office in a state that Trump won by 20 points. So that would be an interesting addition to her team.
Kentucky will not go into the Democrats' column with or without Andy Bashir. He's very comfortable in front of the camera, too. Do you go and pick somebody that's moderate when you're known as pretty left-wing? So those are a quick look at the finalists. She says she's going to be signing by next week. So this is going to be big.
Sure. Do you remember who Hillary Clinton's choice was? You see, nobody.
Tim Kaine. Yeah.
But you had to think about it.
Right. That's true. In Virginia, the so-called moderate from Virginia, it didn't work out for him.
I'm Steve Doocy.
I'm Brian Kilmeade.
And I'm Ainsley Earhart. And click here to subscribe to the Fox News YouTube page to catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis.